The following is part of Cornell Contemporary China Initiative Lecture Series under the Cornell East Asia Program. The arguments and viewpoints of this talk belong solely to the speaker. We hope you enjoy. So today we have Ruixue Jia has come to speak to us from San Diego, where she's been since 2013. But before that, she was in Stockholm, where she did her PhD and I have to read this too because it's long to remember, in the Institute for International Economic Studies at Stockholm University. And your department now in San Diego is the Global Policy and Strategy Department, GPS, newly named. So we're very happy to have her here from all these disparate places to speak to us about some very important things in China. Very interesting mix of economics and social issues. So I hand you.
Okay. Thanks a lot. So this is based on mainly a joint work with Hongbin Li from Tsinghua. So you see his name there. Before talking about China and the exam, I want to share with you a broad motivation why we started thinking about this project. Access to education, especially elite education, is believed to be super important for elite formation and social mobility across all societies, in modern societies. You may know the sociological works by Pierre Bourdieu, for example, and I will not talk about that literature. Instead, I'll talk more about economics. So in economics, there's also burgeoning literature trying to estimate the returns to elite education. For example, if you attend Cornell University, how much more would you earn after graduation compared to attending a non-elite or non-Ivy League university? Surprisingly or not, there's no conclusion on this. And many studies find actually you don't necessarily earn more. Why there's controversy? The conversation about this topic, you would think, oh, it may be easier, just compare the graduate students here with another set of graduate students from a less good university. Let's look at their salaries, and we get the conclusion. But that's not easy. As you see, you can come to Cornell because you are much able than other universities, or your family background might be very different than students from non-elite universities. So in the end, when you go to the job market, even if you earn more, it's not necessarily because of Cornell. It could be because of your own ability or because your family background. So that's a typical challenge known as selection, and that's makes it difficult to reach a conclusion about whether attending elite university really helps or not. And this literature also didn't talk much about elite formation and social mobility. So in this project, we try to first also estimate the returns to elite education, but we also want to speak to social mobility and elite formation in China. In addition, we want to shed some light to understand the mechanism. If we find a wage premium, where does it come from? And why China? Of course, one reason is I'm Chinese, I care about China. And many of you may care about China, that's why you are here. But even if you don't care about China, Chinese case is very interesting to study intellectually, because China is ideal laboratory to understand the role of elite education. As you may know, each year around 10 million students are taking this college entrance exam. This is likely to be the largest standardized exam in the world. And this exam score will determine whether a young person can attend a university and which tier of university. So it's really important for this 10 million of students each year. And there exist cutoffs for different tiers of university. So if you are for the first tier, the elite university, if you are above the cutoff, you're eligible to apply. If not, you are not eligible. When social scientists hear about this, they get excited. You seem not very excited. But why this is so exciting? Because now you can compare relatively similar students. Before I said it's very difficult to compare students in Cornell with a non-Ivy League university students, but now you can compare relatively similar students. Someone are just a few points above the cutoff, someone are just a few points below the cutoff. Now let's look at which university they went to, and let's follow them, see whether they're someone who, whether there's difference in which when they go to the labor market. And in addition to this general motivation, the exam system may be one of the most important institutions in China, as many of you may know. It's often perceived to be the most important channel for commoners to become elite in the society. I will focus on economic consequence in this talk, but this exam system also has other interesting social, cultural, political consequence. If you are interested in the political consequence, you can read a great paper, I was joking, written by Michael and I last year. Look at a historical version of the exam and how that affects political stability of Chinese dynasties. But I wouldn't talk about this in this talk. I'll talk about the modern college entrance exam and the economic consequences. Just to show you some picture, you can easily, if you type the exam, called Gaokao in Chinese, in Google, you'll find many, many impressive pictures online. The first pictures, I select a few for you. The first one is of like how my classroom looked like when I was in high school. People are just heading down practicing the exercises for the exam. They don't have time to ask questions. So that's one, I always think that's one reason why Chinese students are not great at asking questions even when they come to the US. So I'm very happy I'm on this side speaking instead of sitting there thinking about, oh, what questions should I ask? So don't worry if you do not have many questions later. And the second picture is not only the students are clearly working hard, their parents are investing a lot. And when they were writing on the exam during the 2 days in Zhu, their parents are waiting equally anxiously outside. My father was doing that when I was taking the exam. And the schools also came up all types of interesting slogans trying to encourage their students to work hard. And here's the one popular one, said, oh, without the exam, how could you compete with the second generation of the rich? This is because some students complain that it's so harsh to work for the exam, but the rationale is without it, how could you compete in this society? Because the children of the rich have so many advantages. But why do I can stop here and let you go. Oh, this is very important. Students are work hard, parents are invest a lot. Then, of course, on the labor market, there should be some consequence, and we can stop and you can go home. But this is not without controversy, because in this China, as you know, family background is also believed to be crucial in the labor market. And there was even phrase, ironic phrase called to each according to his dad. Marxism has this to each according to his need. Then this is ironically say, oh, in the end, it's to each, the distribution of the society is according to your dad. So if this is right, then this upward mobility provided by the exam might be just an illusion rather than reality. So that's why we want to collect systematic data and doing careful analysis to better understand the general pattern. And if we find something, we also want to understand the mechanism behind the pattern. So I just give you a preview about what we find so far. Then you can think about your Halloween party while I go to the details. So the first is, does scoring the elite university cutoff make one more likely to go to university? If you think, China is super corrupt, maybe the education system is also very corrupt, even there are some cutoffs, it doesn't matter in the end. But the answer is, yes, it matters a lot. Scoring above the cutoff increases the probability a lot of going to an elite university. And the second question is, does elite education lead to a high wage? The answer is yes. And the effect is sizable, as I'll show you. And then if you earn a high wage due to elite education, does that mean that you become elite in the society? Our answer is unclear. I'll be more concrete about this later. So while we find a wage premium, we don't find much in other important dimensions that are important for being an elite in this society, such as perks, such as whether you can work for the government, whether you can work for the banking industry, etc. I'll be more clear later. And we also want to know, that's going to in terms of intergenerational mobility, that's going to an elite university or scoring the cutoff above the cutoff changes the intergenerational mobility. In other words, does that change how your parental status affect your own status? And our answer is no. This might be surprising, but we find no change in intergenerational mobility. I'll be clear later about what we find. Finally, we want to understand what leads to the wage premium. Is that you learn more in an elite university like Cornell, or you actually get to know more people so that you have a better job, or is that this is purely a signaling channel? You don't necessarily learn more, have more human capital than other students in a non-elite university, but you still get higher wage because there's strong signaling. You have elite education, that's very important. And what we find, surprisingly or not, is more evidence for signaling than human capital or social networks. And you might have some questions and we can discuss later. So now I come to the details. I will first briefly introduce some background of how elite education works in China and tells you how we collect this data. And then I'll go to the questions and I'll answer step by step. So all tiers of Chinese university, all the university in China recruit based on the exam system. And what we call elite university in this project is the first tier, and they recruit first after the exam. There are about 2,300 universities in China. Among them, in our study period, only 96 count as the first tier across all provinces. And this definition is very closely related to this project 211. I'm not sure whether you heard about it, but this is a designated 100 universities for the 21st century. But these are not the category of elite university. They heavily overlapped with what we call elite university in this project. And just for your information, all elite universities in China are public, not like Cornell, I guess. And they are not so small. They're more like UC, University of California type of university. And they don't charge higher tuition fee than private universities. And the yearly tuition fee is about 5,000 RMB, so it's about $800, not too high, right? $800. And what makes elite university special is they have more resources and government support, and they attract very different students. And there's an interesting feature. I'll come back to this after telling you all the findings. The education system in China is very well known for strict entrance and easy out. So it has this very strict exam to select students, but once you are in, almost everyone are promised to graduate. So that might affect the mechanism of wage premium we find later. So if you go to elite university or non-elite university, the graduate rate is very similar. So how do university admit students? So just to give you a rough picture, for most provinces, the process works as follows. First, everyone takes the exam, and the exam was graded by province. So the score are only comparable within a province. And after seeing the scores, the government would decide the cutoff for the elite university, and the cutoff would be public. Everyone knows this, and the students know their scores and they know the cutoff. They fill in the application, including the university and the majors. And if you are above the cutoff, the first tier cutoff, you are eligible to apply for these elite universities. But this is not sufficient. You're not, for example, if you're like 20 points above the cutoff, you apply to Tsinghua, which is the top elite university. You are very less likely to get into because many people apply into Tsinghua. So there's a computation. In the end, whether the minimum score for each university is different depending on the computation. So the cutoff determines the eligibility, but it's not sufficient, just to be clear. And then after receiving these applications, the university decides whom to accept. So just how the scores look like. So in this period, most provinces use a scale of 750 points. So they're based on 4 projects. There are 2 tracks. One is called the natural science track. The other is social science track. And they are testing different subjects. I wouldn't read it, but roughly like based on 4 subjects, and together the maximum score is 750 points. And I just want to be clear about the background. If you are below the cutoff, you have a very low probability, not zero, but low probability, you can still apply if you have some extra scores. For example, these extra scores are typically because you're a minority, or your father died for the country, or you get some international prize from math, physics type of computation. You have got some extra score. So even if your original score is below the cutoff, with the extra score, you can become eligible. But the probability is generally very low. And if you are above the cutoff, yes, you can apply now. But as I said before, it's not that 100% sure you are getting to the university you apply. You could be rejected and didn't get into any university. This is the background. Now come to the data. I said, and social scientists are very excited about this. They should have already done this. Why would no one have done this? This is because there's no data on this. Individuals do know their own score, but there's no systematic score available for a large group individual. Even you get that, it's very difficult to link the scores to the labor market outcome. So to do this, one has to collect data oneself. So what we do is we have been collecting this data for 6 years by surveying the graduating cohort in May and June during 2010 and 2015. So as you may know, students would have to leave their school, their college in July. By May and June, they already know what they would do for the future, right? A small share would go to graduate school, but the majority of them already searched for a job, and the majority of them have already got job offers, and that's what we get about their job outcomes. And of course, this is the first job. What I show you, the main result are the first job, but I'll show you some additional, if I have time, additional data telling you that the first job is very important for your future jobs too. And this might be useful for you since you have not searched for a job yet, I guess. So actually yesterday I was in a conference on inequality in the US. People using detailed data in this country showing that the inequality within a cohort, so within a graduating cohort, in lifetime income is already determined at age 25. So basically, your first job is super important in determining lifetime income. And this is also the case in China. I wouldn't have time to tell you how we implement these surveys step by step. But one interesting thing is we have very high response rate. This is because we not really give the survey questionnaires by individuals. Instead, we selected all the individuals by some random sample method, and then we gathered all of them in such a big classroom, and they fill all the questionnaires by the same day, the same time, the same place. That's increased the response rate. So for these 6 years, we managed to survey exactly 90 universities in China. Among them, 26 belong to the elite university group. We deliberately oversampled the elite university so that we can have enough students to compare. So in these 6 years, we collected information for about 40,000 students in their graduating year. So the first map, just to show you where the 90 universities were located. They are, as you see, they're widely spread across 26 provinces in China. And if you look at where their students come from, they come from all over China. We don't have like university in Tibet, but we still have students from Tibet in other provinces. So we have about 40,000 students, but for today's talk, I will focus on about 10,000 students of them who have scores just within 20 points around the cutoff. If you recall that the maximum score is 750 points, so 20 points, is not that large. So people are relatively comparable, and so we'll compare students. All of them are within 20 points around the cutoff. So now I come to the first set result to show you that how the exam scores affect access to elite education. and also show you a little bit about how this affects other dimensions, like what major they would be majoring in, where they study, and their rank in college. So the first figure, so the x-axis is the point to the cutoff. So each dot indicates, oh, I'm 1 point, not a group of students are 1 point below or 5 points below the cutoff or 5 points above the cutoff. The y-axis plot the average probability of attending an elite university. So what you see is this is 0 here. There's very small probability that one can go to an elite university if they are below the cutoff. But you see this very clear jump after one is above the cutoff. And this is the increase as you're getting high scores. And this is clearly shows there's significant change if you're above the cutoff. You're much more likely to attend an elite university. As I said, why do I put it here? Because the scores are only comparable within province year and track. There are 2 tracks. So sometimes you want to isolate these facts, just compare students within the province year and track. So I only compare students within Beijing. One student in Beijing with another student in Beijing. I'm not compare a student in Beijing with a student in Shandong, for example. And you see, after considering this, you see a similar pattern. So in terms of magnitude, if you are scoring above the cutoff, the probability of getting into elite university would be increased by 0.15. Well, this is about over 70% of the mean. So your probability of going to elite university increased by 70%, and this is pretty large. And you would wonder, I will tell you that why we want to use this kind of design is to make sure that the students around the cutoff are comparable, right? So we want to check just to show you, if you look at their gender, their age, whether they have rural or urban, or their family income, you will find that they are similar. There's no similar, this jump in these figures, implying that they're fairly comparable. If you don't do this way, if you just look at all the students, then you also see discontinuity. You see a jump because students in elite university or have high scores are typically also have from high income families, etc. And this way we can make sure that these students are comparable. I want to mention that it's not scoring above the cutoff not only changes whether you go to an elite university, it also changes your major, and it changes where you go to, where you study, and it changes your ranking in college. So how does this work? So if you think about this, if you are just above the cutoff, right, you are lucky, you're above the cutoff, but you are the worst in this eligible group. All the other students have higher score than you, right? Is this clear? So you are worst. So you are actually less likely to go to a good major. Like in this period, economics, finance, and law are the more popular major. You are less likely to be able to enroll in such popular major because among those are eligible for elite university, you are the worst. Whereas if you are in a non-elite group, even though you are not eligible to elite university, compared with your peers, you are the best. So there's an interesting reversal pattern here. And this is what we find. If you look at the probability, this is the same, like score point by point relative to the cutoff. If you look at the probability of enrolling econ management or law, you'll see actually if you are above the cutoff, you are slightly less likely to major in these popular major fields. And this can be explained by a slightly increase in STEM and slightly increase in humanity. And if you look at where the university is located, they're more likely to be outside the home province because all these elite universities typically could be in provinces far away from the home province. So they're also more likely to study outside their home province. And as I said, they are relatively worse within the eligible group. This could be reflected by their ranking in college. So in the survey, we asked, how do you think about your rank in your class? like, do you think you belong to 20%, top 20% or bottom 20%? What's interesting is there's a very interesting bias. For example, only 5% of students claim that they're bottom 20. This doesn't make sense, right? But that's our bias. And over 40% of students claim they are top 20. So we are always overconfident, right? We are less likely to think we are like the bottom. We are more likely to think we are the top. But despite this interesting bias, you will see that if you are above the cutoff, you are less likely to see you are on the top. You are more likely to see you are bottom. All this just to paint the picture that, yes, these people are eligible to elite university if they're above the cutoff, but they also have some disadvantage in major and maybe college ranking. All this might affect their labor market outcome too, and we need to consider this when we come to the wage part. Now I'll come to the wage part. I will first show you, how this affects your wage, the first job wage, and I need to tell you a little bit about how major and other dimensions affect these findings, and what's the implication on elite status for the students, and how important the first job for your future jobs. Just before showing the wage, I want to, as you can imagine, not everyone started looking for a job, right? Some of them would go to graduate school. So on average, 74% searched for a job. Among those searched for a job, 74 got offered. This is not typo. It just happened to be the case. And so I told you in the first part, there are about 10,000 students we look at in terms of entry into college. And now we are looking at the wage part. We only have half of these students really have wage information. And just for your information, those above the cutoff are slightly less likely to look for jobs. As you can imagine, if you go to an elite university, you might have other options, etc. That affects the probability, but the difference is not huge. So if you look at the wage, you can look at this similar graph point by point. And this is a better way of looking at that. The y-axis now is the log wage. If you think about the difference between the right-hand side and the left-hand side and the right-hand side, you can think of the percent change in wage level. So if you look at the difference between these two, you can't see clearly, so you have to trust me. It's about 6%. So the wage difference would be about 6%. If you are just above the cutoff, your monthly wage is increased by 6%. And this is not, this is means about 160 RMB. It's about 26 US dollars. It may be not huge, but if you look at wage premium, you have to divide this wage difference by the probability increased, the probability of going to elite university increased by being above the cutoff. And this would give us an estimate about 40%, so which is pretty large. It means that elite education has a wage premium about 40%, that's about 1,000 RMB in a month. In this period, I forgot to say, the monthly wage for these fresh graduates is about 2,500 RMB. So 1,000 basically is about 40% of the monthly increase. So roughly you can think going to an elite university, the median wage would be about 3,500. There are no good, very well identified wage premium for college students in China either, but we can compare with them. If you look at other contests, like in the US, some estimate is 0. So the elite university, like the Kruger-Dale study, there's no elite education wage premium. There's one study in Italy compared students who could just go to Bocconi versus other university, and they had an estimate of 45%. But it's difficult to compare across countries. I haven't considered major or location of university or your ranking class, how that affects your wage premium. But as you can already imagine, this major and the ranking all have a disadvantage, right? As I said, you are the worst, basically, if you are above the cutoff. You are worst among the eligible group. And if you include them, that only makes your wage premium slightly larger. If you compare, so as I said before, now you have if you are above the cutoff, you are more eligible. You are more likely to go to university, go to elite university, but you are less likely to go to major in a popular field. So if you consider that, take care of that, you'll find actually the wage premium of elite education is slightly higher, from 6 to include to be 7%, for example. And now I show you that yes, elite education has some wage premium. However, does that mean that a young person now become elite in this society? If you know about this country, you would say, oh, I don't know, because many elite dimensions cannot be captured by the wage premium. For example, maybe going to a banking industry, finding a job in SOE, or have a hukou in Beijing or Shanghai. These are typically also very important for elite status. Does going to an elite university change all these dimensions? That's what we want to answer. So we examine like 3 dimensions to shed light on this question. First, we look at how what job characteristics explain the wage premium. Is that explained by your occupation, industry, or ownership, or is actually explained by something like within the industry occupation? So you are still working in the same occupation, but you have different wage. We also define elite occupation, industry, and ownership in an interesting way, I think. So in the data, we ask people, what is their ideal occupation industry? We know they realized industry and occupation, right? We know their ideal industry and occupation. Then this gives us some ratio. If an industry like banking, most people hope to work in it, but very few can realize this job, then this is likely to be an elite occupation. Similarly for industry and ownership. So this gives us some measure of eliteness of their job. And finally, we also check some non-wage benefits, like whether they get housing subsidy, whether they have like all types of insurance. In the end, we don't find, in all these dimensions, we don't find evidence that this means the people with elite education or also enter the elite club. So don't worry about the tables. If we check which job characteristics explain the wage premium, in the end we find it's not explained by their occupation or industry. It's actually explained by some variation within occupation industry. So you are not necessarily more likely to work for the bank industry or more likely to work for the government. It's within the same industry you earn a higher wage. So if we define industry or occupation by this ratio I mentioned to you, maybe this is a bit interesting. So for example, give you like management personnel or being a leader in a firm or in the government is an occupation. You typically think this as like elite occupation. We can also measure this with data. For example, only 1% of people would realize a management personnel occupation. But if you look at how many people hope to work in this occupation, it's 10 times high. So this ratio is only 0.1, meaning that only 1 in 10 of people could realize their dream. But if you look at a skilled worker, for example, you'll find a ratio, or if you look at clerks, for example, you'll find the ratio would be 4. So only 7% of people would like to work as a clerk, but 28% had to work as a clerk in the end. So this gives us this measure of elite status or occupation. Similarly, we can look at industry or ownership, and we don't find that this is affected by being above the cutoff or not. If we also look at other dimensions, like whether you have a hukou in Beijing, or whether you get housing subsidy, or whether you have better insurance, all these are not, we find no difference between above the cutoff or below the cutoff. So all the message is, yes, we find a wage premium, but if you measure like elite status in other like typical sociological way, you wouldn't find that being above the cutoff is enough for you to become an elite in the society. I wouldn't go to the details, but we only have the first job in our survey, right? By our design, we cannot follow these people in labor market And to get some sense to understand how important the first job is, we downloaded like millions of CVs from a major job recruitment site called jobpin.com. And there, people have their CV and job history, and we look at the correlation of how the first job affects their future job wages. And we find strong persistence. And this is also true in the US, I guess. Your first job is very important, determining your future job earnings. So the message is that even though we don't have future jobs for these individuals, our findings is likely to matter for the future too. So I come to the social mobility part. It might sound a bit confusing. If on the one hand, yes, you earn a high wage, of course you have a mobility now, right? Because your wage rank is increased. But when people talk about social mobility, there's another important dimension, is this intergenerational mobility. As we all know, there's always your parent status and your status is always positively correlated. There's always a positive line between parental status and income status. Well, and the children's status. We want to know whether this slope changed by being above or below the cutoff. This is what I mean. So just to give you two scenarios, the red line indicates those above the cutoff, and the blue line indicates those below the cutoff. And in the first scenario, this red line is flatter than the blue line. So I forgot to say the x-axis is the income rank of the parent, and the y-axis is the income rank of the children. In every society, there's a positive slope. If your parent have a high rank, the children will tend to have a high rank. What's interesting here, we are interested in if you are above the cutoff, is this rank become flatter or steeper? It becomes flatter, meaning that now the parental income becomes less important if you are above the cutoff. So this is called increased social mobility, intergenerational mobility. And in the other case, if you are above the cutoff, actually the line becomes even steeper. So it's like the parental status becomes even more important. I think this is what Pierre Bourdieu might talk about. Elite parents would have more elite kids. And elite education is just a way for elite reproduction. And we need to see that ex ante, we don't know which is likely to be true. It depends on your thinking about the society. If you think the exam system is great, it levels the play field, and the parental status should become less important once they are above the cutoff. If you think, in the end, the rich kids should earn even more given the same education, you would likely to expect this is the second case. And what we find in the data actually is neither the case. So that's why it's interesting to see the data, because if this is so important, such an important institution in China. If you search online, you find scholars have all types of argument and hypotheses. Some think, it's very good system, especially for the poor, and something is basically an illusion, it's cheating. In the end, it doesn't help the poor. So it's really important to show the data. And this is what we find. You basically see a parallel shift, which means being above the cutoff does neither increases nor decreases intergenerational link. There are a few messages here. First, if you think the exam system attenuates parental status, parental income influence, then this is an illusion. This is too naive. Parental status is still very important. One way to look at this is to think about if you are per case here, for example, at the 20 to 40% income, 20 to 40 quintile income, and if you're above the cutoff, right, you indeed have a higher wage rank. But if you compare with the kid from the very rich, the top 20 percentile income families, and even he or she doesn't pass the exam, his wage rank is still higher. So now, coming back, whether can I compete with the second generation rich now? The answer is it depends on how rich the second generation is. If he is from the middle group, yes, you can compete with him or her now. But if he's from a very, very rich family, you still cannot compete with her or him. But I want to be clear, this is not too pessimistic. In many elite institutions, actually it's likely to be this case. If you go to elite university, if your parents are richer, you earn even more, right? So this is more optimistic than this case, but more pessimistic than the level playing field argument. Finally, we want to understand what drives the wage premium. Is that driven by human capital? You earn more, you're more productive, so you get paid more. Or is that driven by social networks? You have, better students. Your classmate father has worked for the government, you get a better job. Or it's actually a signaling. You not necessarily learn more, but actually you still get a higher wage. So this is very difficult to pin down. So what I show you is some suggestive evidence. And there are very few studies trying to pin down each channel because it's very difficult to measure any of them, as you can imagine. What is human capital, for example? So what we do is, the typical measure of human capital is your performance in college. And you want to, ideal measure is some test that everyone takes across universities so that it's comparable. So GPA is not great, right? Because different universities use different ways of GPA, given GPA, so it's not very comparable. So there's one measure that is close to this ideal most students would take, and they are standardized, so you can compare across universities. That is the National English Test. Almost every student would take it, and the scores are standardized, and it's, I think, now graded by computer, so it's comparable. And then we have many other measures in terms of certificate or exam performance in college. And we check whether there's difference for those above the cutoff and below cutoff. And we don't find any difference. Also, we ask them how many hours they study in college. And they don't study for a lot. But if they study, they often study English. So we also look at how they put how their effort look like for those above the cutoff and below the cutoff, and we find no difference either. So in all the measures on human capital, like majors, we cannot explain our finding either. So in all these measures we can measure, we can have in terms of human capital, we find no difference. So it's not that we want to reject this hypothesis, but we just have no evidence that they perform better or have more more certificate to prove they're better. And if we look at network, if you know a little bit about China, you would think about this is about network. So what we do is we look at we ask them how you find your job. We also look at how your networks affect their wage. So when we come to the job search part, people usually use different ways of search job, like off-campus job fairs or on-campus job fairs of job website or using networks. And we don't find evidence that those above the cutoff are more likely to use use network. If anything, we find that they're more likely to use on-campus fairs. But that's a bit related to what Panler said. Those elite universities often attract better employers, so they have on-campus fairs, which gives these people more opportunities to get better jobs. But this is not a network channel. This is more likely to be a signaling channel. In our understanding, is the reputation of the university matters in terms of attracting the employers. And if we look at how this network affect wage premium, so to be sure, yes, if you are above the cutoff, you go to elite university, indeed you have better networks. For example, if you measure the share of your classmate whose father has college degree or whose father is a party member, indeed the probability is higher. So if you're above the cutoff, your classmate background is better. That's for sure. We do find that in the data. But we found this cannot explain your wage premium. So it's not explained by your schoolmate background. But there's one caveat in this findings. We are looking at the first job. And this type of weak ties, your classmate, your schoolmate's father's connection often matters in the long run. In the first job, maybe it doesn't matter much, but in the long run, it can matter more. But we cannot study that. And Another piece of evidence on signaling is suggestive because it's very difficult to measure signaling unless you are in a lab. In the real world, you don't really know how people send the signals. We asked them something about discrimination, what kind of discrimination they experience when they are on the job market. Like we asked like gender, appearance, accident, rural, etc. We don't find any difference in this dimension. There's only one dimension, which is a very sizable difference, but not precisely estimated, is that if you are above the cutoff, you are less likely to say that you are discriminated because of a university rank. This is almost mechanical, right? Because if you're above the cutoff, you are more likely to go to elite university, and you are less likely to think you will be discriminated or you are discriminated because of the university rank. But this is all this, if you think discrimination as a negative signaling, then this is also more consistent with the signaling mechanism. So in this part, it's not that we want to reject any hypothesis. We don't need, and this could be a paper without this part. What we want to know is just let's try as many measures as possible and see which is more consistent with the data. And in the end, it's more consistent with the signaling mechanism. And in reflection, in retrospect, I wasn't very surprised. Initially, I was a bit disappointed. Oh, we don't find human capital evidence. But now I kind of think, you think about this education institution, which is very strict in entries, but very relaxed on exit. So, students don't have a lot of incentive to learn much. I don't know whether you have studied in Chinese college, whether you shared my feelings, but they don't have much incentives to learn for graduation, for example. So yeah, I can stop here, but feel free to ask questions. Yeah, thanks.